loneliness, BDSM, and the power of the theater. What else could you want? Welcome to the Devs. Hello, welcome or welcome back to Reading from the Devs. My name is Lecton. Thank you for spending some time with me today. Today I have a review for you. This is a review of A Game in Yellow by Hailey Piper. This is being published by Saga Press on August 12th, 2025, and I was given a complimentary copy in exchange for an honest review. And this story is intense. This is one of the loneliest novels I think I've read in a long time, and it really gets under your skin. So what it's about is the main character is a young woman named Carmen, and she is in a loving relationship with her girlfriend Blanca, but for some reason, she doesn't really have any libido. Her libido has disappeared, and she realizes this is like disastrous for her relationship and also for her mental health. So she keeps having to push herself farther and farther and trying new things to get her libido to actually feel desire or lust, right? And often she and her partner will begin engaging in some sort of sexual activity and she just loses all interest immediately. And so she sees this is quite destructive. It isn't coming from like a place of trauma, but there's something else going on. Now, I would say reading it from the outside, it really just seems like she's depressed. And she even says that she's probably just depressed and needs to see a therapist. But then she says, but I don't have the money to see a therapist. And even if I did have the money, I'd have to find a therapist who is queer friendly. And then I'd have to be put on a wait list. And then I'd have to wait for months. And so thanks to the hellscape that is American capitalism and our healthcare system being caught in that and a lack of access to affordable mental health care, then the story results. She may just be going through something that is normal and she doesn't have the appropriate tools for it. So what she ends up doing is chasing a high after high after high. And so her and her girlfriend turn to BDSM. And what she is really seeking out is what they refer to as survivor's euphoria. But in order to experience survivor's euphoria, you have to get closer and closer to death each time, right? You have to give up all control and get closer and closer to the edge. Otherwise, you're not going to get that hit. And so the very first scene we see of them engaging in BDSM play is like intense. And now there are scenes throughout the novel of their BDSM play, and it is graphic. It isn't sexually explicit very much. It isn't like gross. It isn't tawdry, but there is a lot of graphic sexual content, and some of it can be quite disturbing. I'll talk about the BDSM content a little bit later in the review. But so that is where she's at. No matter what they're trying, they're already trying like to the extreme edge of what they can try with BDSM, and it isn't working. And then they happen upon another woman named Smoke who shows them a play, and the play is The King in Yellow. And just reading a small page of this play ignites passion and fire in Carmen like she's never seen before. And so it becomes like a drug for her. Hailey Piper, the author of this book, is referencing the book A King in Yellow, which is written by Robert Chambers in 1895. And that itself is a collection of short stories called A King in Yellow. And in those short stories, the first 4 of them are connected. And within them, there is a play called The King in Yellow, and anyone who reads this play goes mad, goes insane. So that is the mythology that Hailey Piper is playing on in this novel. She's taking the King in Yellow play that comes from this late 19th century novel or a collection of short stories and bringing that like folklore into her novel. And there are many other pieces of pop culture who have played with the idea of Carcosa. That's where this play takes place, and the King in Yellow as a person, as well as the King in Yellow the play and how it incites insanity in its readers. So she's in the first one to play with this. And famously, the TV show True Detective, the first season, played with the King in Yellow like a legend and folklore, right? But so in the world of this novel, if you start to read this play, it has these wild effects on you. And so, of course, it gets out of control, and you can't just read a little. She wants to read more and more and more, and the world of the play starts like seeping into her real life, and her real life starts seeping into the world of the play, because as you learn in the story, you don't read the play reads you. And so what is real and what is not real gets really confusing, and things don't go well for anyone, okay? And so that is like the premise. And like I said, this is a very lonely story. The world building is exquisite. It is so well done, and it really is this nuanced exploration of how Carmen exists in multiple different worlds, right? She has her world that is at her apartment with her girlfriend. She has her world at work. She has her world when she's in the clubs. Yeah, in all these different social spaces, they all cause different types of emotional distress because she's so unhappy with herself and with who she is, and she feels like she's failing at everything. And so there is this nuanced exploration of what it means to exist in the world and not to be confident of yourself and who you are. And it creates this negative feedback loop, right? Because when you don't have a sense of self that you can feel grounded in, then you get more distressed over that, and it causes you to lose grasp. And so the world building is really well rounded, and it shows this one woman in distress in multiple ways. And it creates this atmosphere within the story that is really heavy and oppressive. It feels almost inescapable, the atmosphere of this novel. It is like a shroud that is covering you. And it is covering you and trapping you in this fever dream world that doesn't really make any sense. You think it makes sense. You think it's just kind of lonely and sad, but at least makes sense. And then it devolves into something else. And you don't feel like you can escape, right? It's hard to even like catch your breath because something is sitting on your chest and restricting your ability to breathe. And it's really well done. I mean, that's not obviously for everyone. Like, not everyone likes to have that oppressive nature in their story, but she does a great job of it here. You know, I really enjoy Hailey Piper as an author. I've read a number of her novels, as well as a novella and a whole bunch of her short stories. And I will say, this isn't like any of the other things I've read from her. She usually is dealing with cosmic terror or existential terror. And I guess in that way, this is dealing with existential terror. It doesn't have the cosmic element. You know, it's more of a dark fantasy or almost dark folklore, right? But it does bring in this existential dread. It doesn't quite have the body horror that she has in some of her other work, but it does have a sense of not being confident in your body and how that then manifests in the way you understand the world and you live in the world. As part of her body of work, this is a really interesting turn. It's really slow paced. It is really a slow burn that is effective to a point. I think it overwhelms the story a little bit, but she does a great job of doing this world building and atmosphere creation that really draw you into this novel, and they make you like culpable in the events of the novel in a way that I found really enticing. You know, the characters are also really well drawn. The main character, Carmen, she is so lost in herself that she keeps making poor choices, and it's really hard to spend time with her because she's so easy to empathize with. She feels incredibly well-rounded. She feels genuine, and you see her make bad decisions, and it's hard. Like, it's hard to spend time with this character, with any of them. So you have her as the main character, and then the two ancillary characters or secondary characters that you spend the most time with are her girlfriend, Blanca, and then this other woman they meet named Smoke. And there are a few other ancillary characters that pop in and out, like at her workplace and so forth, but those are the main three, and all of them I think are really interesting. All of them are complicated, and they feel almost hyper real, right? They feel genuine, but they feel out of place. Like they don't exist in the world that they're supposed to exist in. And I think that's intentional, right? So they feel like real people, but there's some sort of dissonance happening in just the way they exist in the world. And so I really appreciated the characters. They all felt very vulnerable. They all felt very open. And it was hard to spend time with them because you see things going in the wrong direction. You see things that, aren't working out for any of them. And that made it hard to spend time with them because you do like them so much. And they do feel so real. They don't feel like stereotypes in any way. They don't feel like they are just placeholders, you know? So the character work is exquisite, and it works with the world building in a really, really detailed way. And that is complemented by the writing. The writing is very dreamlike, right? And it's very confusing, and it's lush. It's really sensual in some ways. And what's interesting is it's sensual, but it seems like it is afraid of itself, if that makes sense. And it kind of gets off on being afraid of itself. It's excited by that fear, which goes, hand in hand with the whole idea of BDSM, or maybe not the whole idea, but one of the things of BDSM, it isn't about the violence, right? BDSM is about control. It's about giving up all control or having complete control. And that there is a tension there, right? And so part of the pleasure that comes from BDSM activities is being afraid of what's going to happen next and then finding pleasure or erotic pleasure in that fear. And so that creating tension and creating fear and then being a little bit excited by that fear, you can feel that in the writing. So it really plays well with the world that she's created and the environment or the activities our main characters are circling around. It plays well with the writing because the writing has that same sense. It's very sensual, like I said, it's very lush, and it has this weight to it that is, very descriptive, and it moves things along, but in this very dreamlike, feverish, confusing sort of way. So there is always momentum going to some degree. There is always, you feel like there's direction. It is inevitable where it is heading, and it doesn't feel rushed to get there. And so I will say that is one thing that I didn't love about the story. I liked that it was slow paced. I liked the way it was building into something. But, for the first 70%, it's just slowly descending into madness. And then that very last 30%, like things get out of control, and they get out of control really quickly. And in the beginning, there's no supernatural elements at all. It's just this character who is depressed, who is trying to make sense of her life and is lonely, even though she's in a loving relationship. That is what you get in the beginning. And then you see things deteriorate slowly, slowly, slowly. And then the supernatural comes in, and you have this little rush of maybe this is a way to fix things. But of course, you know, as a reader, that this is not going to fix things, right? And she very clearly gets obsessed really quickly, like you do with any drug. The first hit is beautiful and it makes things, you know, amazing. You know, the first time she read a page of The King in Yellow, they were in a club and she immediately like was overwhelmed with lust for her girlfriend right there in the club. She went at it, but she doesn't even remember what was in the play, right? That's interesting. That's an important thing to say, I should say, that throughout the story, you get bits of the play mixed in, including dialogue from the play, whole scenes from the play. And some of that dialogue is actually the same as what was in Robert Chambers' original King in Yellow short stories. So some of the dialogue comes right from that 19th century collection of short stories, but some is new for this novel, including things that shouldn't ever be in the play. Because like I said, the play reads you. So she herself becomes a character in the play, and she realizes that she's a character in the play. But then the play is describing scenes of her childhood. It's describing a scene of when she was caught kissing a girl by her parents and they punished her. And then it describes scenes of the traumatic parts of her girlfriend's childhood, traumatic things that she didn't know about, you know, because her and her girlfriend, even though they're very loving, there is this level of codependence. And there is something about their relationship that is actually kind of toxic, where they don't share their emotional truths with each other. You know, they don't know each other's full history. They know traumatic things have happened, but they haven't pried into each other's history, which seems strange for a couple that is so in love and is living together. To not know what kind of trauma your partner has gone through means like you're shutting off a part of them. Yet that is revealed to her in this play. So the story goes back and forth between your narration and time in the play. And for our character, they get blurred. She doesn't know what is play, what is real. And so these two realities merge into one, and she becomes overwhelmed, and then the writing becomes overwhelmed as a result. But all of this is done very slowly. And I would have liked even just one or two other eruptions of weirdness or horror or danger earlier in the story to really keep you on the edge of your seat. You know that things are going in a bad direction. You know things are getting out of control. Things are deteriorating. That's all clear. But you feel like you're trapped in this hazy fog of the nightmare world of the play, the same as the character is. And I just wanted something to pull me through a little faster, if that makes sense. Something to give me a glimpse of what was to come. Either a glimpse that there could be salvation, or a glimpse that it could be a whole lot worse. Something. Some sort of eruption of weirdness or horror earlier on. And you didn't really get a lot of those. You have little things happening, like very small things, but they're things that are disquieting, things that set you, you know, wondering what's going on, but they don't really like grip you and say, oh my goodness, I have to pay attention, if that makes sense. And so the pacing was quite deliberate, and I appreciated the pacing. I think it set the mood really well. It worked with the story being told, and the novel isn't very long either. So that worked. I just do wish there had been a few little extra bits of excitement, you know, scattered throughout to make that last 30% really shine. You had to have a tease of it, and you don't really get any tease. It just comes out of nowhere, right? And it's not out of nowhere, because it is the inevitable result of all these things layering on top of themselves that you see happening. But I still would have liked just a little bit more of a tease earlier on. However, if you know that going in, you know that this is a very feverish, slow, you know, unreliable story. And once you know that going in, then you can kind of adjust your expectations, and then you can really fall into the story and get lost in it, because the story has a lot of interesting things that it's playing with. I think at its heart is talking about loneliness and intimacy and how those two things intersect. Sometimes you can have a very intimate relationship that is still riddled with loneliness, which is what we see in our main character, right? There are also questions of self-worth and honesty, trust, performance, and sometimes rather, how our performance actually can keep us trapped. Like we perform what we think we need to be to succeed in the world or to succeed in our relationships, and that performance actually is holding us back and keeping us trapped in something. So these are all really interesting things. What I found really interesting was these characters are so desperate to make their relationship work, and they feel like there's a genuine love between them they need to keep alive, and there really is. But their relationship, like I said, it feels like it's actually riddled with codependence and quite toxic. Now, the BDSM parts of the relationship, I think, aren't the toxic parts. I think actually, you know, I haven't read a lot of depictions of BDSM, but of all the ones I have read, this is one of the best, right? This shows a very healthy relationship with BDSM, both in sexual scenarios and when they're playing throughout the day, the idea of control, of master-slave dynamic, and of safe words, and all of the different physical as well as psychological aspects of BDSM are discussed here in what I feel like are a really healthy way, actually. And I think it is it's not tawdry. It doesn't like use BDSM as a way to like look at how freakish these women are. It's nothing like that. It's actually very normalized. And, the problem is our main character is, kind of emotionally devastated and isn't seeking out proper help for that. And so relying on sex play as a way to deal with emotional issues isn't going to work. So I don't think that that is a toxic part of the relationship. But like I said, they don't know these fundamental truths about each other. So the sexual liberation they have, it contrasts really strongly against their emotional kind of protectionism, right? How guarded they are with their emotions, even when they're so free with their bodies. And I thought that was really interesting because, again, it goes to this idea of intimacy and loneliness and what does it mean to be in a relationship? What is the actual bedrock of a healthy relationship? If your libido is waning and you don't have this incredibly active sex life, but you have a deep trust and confidence and a healthy emotional relationship, then what isn't that a firmer bedrock to build a life together off of than constantly be seeking out new types of euphoria, like we said, survivor euphoria that needs death to be a whisper away in order to actually manifest. Seeking that out as the basis of your relationship to preserve the sexual nature of your relationship instead of the emotional one seems counterproductive, right? So what are these women actually searching for? And are they ever going to find happiness if what they're searching for seems counterindicative to the type of emotional honesty that their relationship maybe is missing? So these are all things that I think are explored like really skillfully in this novel. But I think that about sums it up. It is a slow burn, a psychological horror that has existential dread and supernatural horror mixed in. It is very fever dreamish. It is confusing. It is unsettling, disquieting. It leaves you really not sure where you stand, what you can grasp onto as real or not real. It has an almost hyper real type of surreality, if that makes sense, that things stand out because the way they exist is so contradictory to the atmosphere behind them. And it asks a lot of important questions, or at least interesting questions. So I enjoyed this novel, and like I said, it isn't for everyone. There are some graphic scenes, and it is a slow burn, and it is very atmospheric and almost oppressive. So you'll know if that is something you're drawn to. But I think what Hailey Piper is doing here is really skillful, and it's just exciting to continue to see the different types of horrific depth that she is willing to plumb in her writing. So that is all I think I have to say about this. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you read this novel yet? Or have you read any other work by Hailey Piper? What have you thought of it? Or for that matter, have you engaged with any other pop culture that has to deal with the King in Yellow mythos? Or have you read Robert Chambers' original set of short stories? I'd love to have a conversation about any of these things down below in the comments. But for now, thank you for spending some time with me today. I appreciate you. Please be kind to yourselves, take care of each other, and go slowly.